I use bottom baits probably 25% of my angling, and it's usually only when I'm very aware of the type of bottom that I'm actually fishing on. So if I'm going to be in a swim for any length of time, I get the leading rod out, have a good lead around and really map out the bottom, you know. I'll be honest, I use bottom baits for probably 25% of my angling because most of the type of fishing I do is very reactive, short sessions, and pop-ups suit the style of fishing that I do a lot better. But there are definitely times when you need to be fishing hard on the bottom. So I don't discount them completely, but I'd only really use a bottom bait when I know exactly the type of bottom that I'm landing on. Generally it's when I can feel like hard gravel out in the spot, maybe a few little dinks of gravel in amongst silt and stuff like that. If I've got any doubt, then usually I'll go for a bottom bait, but sorry, a pop-up. But yeah, it has to be a hard spot really, so I really need to feel that lead crack down. And when I slowly draw it back over the area, I want to feel a nice smooth glide. And like I say, if I feel little bits of gravel in amongst the silt as well, even better. I do tend to stay away from the real machine gun gravel spots because you know, the type of carp that I fish for, a little bit wary on those kind of areas. But it needs to be a real hard drop really, nice and crisp, and you think, yeah, that's definitely a nice hard spot out there. That's a bottom bait one, that. I'd say Yateley was probably one of those waters where it would have been difficult to get a bite on a pop-up. Again, just the nature of the fishing over there, you know, very defined spots. In that case, it was very hard gravel spots, you know, they were the same spots fished by everyone, year in, year out, so they become very clean and they've been kept clean by the feeding fish every single season. I just think you put a pop-up on a spot like that and they probably suss you out straight away, you know, particularly when they're feeding so tight to the bottom. I think that's the key thing. It's obviously the spot is important when it comes to deciding what rig you're going to use, but also it's the kind of bait that you're feeding as well. All the small stuff on the bottom where you're really drawing the fish down, when they're inspecting things a lot easier then, you know, pop-up rigs are going to stand out. But if you're fishing a spread of boilies out in the pond and there might be a couple of feet between hook baits, the fish are obviously moving up and moving in between the hook baits, so a pop-up just looks like another bait on the bottom in that case, you know. I use a pop-up for probably 75% of my angling, and it's mostly down to the type of fishing that I'm doing, you know. I'm a short session angler. 9 times out of 10 I'm just reacting off the signs that I see, you know. I might be fishing swims where I don't have a great deal of knowledge of the bottom. I don't have the time to map those swims out, you know. I'm reacting to signs, getting set up into the swim, and I need a rig that's going to present pretty much on any type of bottom, you know. And a pop-up rig obviously where you can control the descent of the bait. And if you balance out your pop-up nice and slowly, it will settle down even on quite thick weeds, you know, particularly if you're using a chod rig as well. So any type of bottom where I'm a little bit unsure of what I'm landing on, it's a pop-up 9 times out of 10 for me. Big fish rig. I use 3 rigs actually. I know that sounds a bit boring, but I've literally, from years and years of angling, I've played around with every single rig going, and every year there's a new rig that people are talking about, but I stick to 3 presentations. If it's really, really choddy out there or very, very weedy, then obviously I use a chod rig, which will pretty much present on any type of bottom, you know, 2-foot weed, right the way down to clean silt, and that is kind of looking sweet every time. Probably the rig I use more than any is just a sort of Hinge Stiff Rig, so it's that kind of chod rig upright section. But I fish a softer boom, and again, that's just so that I know that it will present on the slightly dirtier bottoms when I don't feel there's a need to use a chod rig. And lastly, just a straightforward bottom bait rig, you know. It sounds boring, but after a while you realise that it's very rarely all about the rigs that you're using, you know. If it's got to be about the bait and whether they want to pick that particular bait up. And a rig is just a tool to present the bait with at the end of the day, you know. I very rarely get mixed up playing around with this, that and the other, and it doesn't suit the type of fishing that I do, you know, a long time between bites, so I need to know that when I get that pickup, it's a rig that I've caught plenty of fish on in the past, I know how it works, and yeah, just all that gets very confusing when you start messing around with rigs. So my advice would definitely be to stick to a couple of presentations that you've got the confidence in, and yeah, just keep going with those really, you know. Particularly when I'm using a Hinge Stiff Rig, I like to critically balance the bait. 2 reasons really. One, obviously I can control how the rig lands. If the bait's sinking very slowly, then obviously it's going to settle down over any type of bottom. So I just balance that bait out so that it sinks ever so slowly. A Chod rig, well, because I set it up on the lead core and it's running up the lead core, the way they sort of land anyway, they always drop down quite slowly. And secondly, because, you know, I think it just catches the fish off guard, you know. When you're not fishing over a tight spread of bait, and they're moving between mouthfuls or picking up a boilie and then moving on to the next one, when all of a sudden they're faced with a bait that shoots into the mouth much quicker, and you couple that with a really sharp hook and a heavy lead, it's kind of over before they realise what's going on, really. So yeah, I've always been a fan of correctly balancing my baits out. The only time I would stay well clear of that is if I'm fishing hard on the bottom over a tight feed of bait and I don't want the bait flicking up and appearing unnatural then, you know. I want it to behave just like all the freebies. So in that instance, I'd be quite happy to fish one straight out the bag. But pop-up rigs, when I'm fishing over bottom, I'm not completely sure of. A nice slow descent ensures that it always presents well, and it's more likely to catch the carp off guard when they swim over it as well. I can't honestly remember the last time I used a hook bait that wasn't boosted in some way. I really can't. Even bottom baits, you know, I mean, when I get my bait out the freezer, I'm already going to work at it then with a few different liquids and powders, because not everyone's doing that kind of thing, you know, and it's those little small things that you can do that will really make the difference, you know, making the effort. And yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think using a bait straight out the bag sometimes certainly isn't going to be that detrimental, but I just think when you boost them up with some of the quality liquids that are available to you today and the powders and things like that, you can just turn a good hook bait into a supercharged hook bait, you know, that it's almost impossible for them to ignore. So yeah, near enough every single hook bait that I put out there has been boosted in some way. I want that bait to be really kicking off a kind of eat me signal, you know, and the more bait I put out, I think the more important it is to have a hook bait that sticks out, you know, and really draws them to that particular bait. I think early in the year, you know, when the fish are waking up, and I think a lot of the feeding is done just by sight, you know, particularly when the fish are up in the water. There's no doubt about it that bright hook baits through the spring particularly, they always seem to get the majority of the bites every year, you know. It's again, it's going back to giving them something that they can see in the first place, you know. That's a big part of it in fishing. I guess as the sort of captures stack up through the season and as the fish become a bit more varied, I'm more likely to then try and match the freebies that I'm fishing. I mean, I make my own cork ball pop-ups, but I don't generally start to use them until midway through the spring when I feel that the baits are, you know, being readily accepted along with the free offerings then. So I guess mainly bright baits to begin the year, and then as the year progresses, I'll normally move on to the food baits. And then it kind of goes full circle. So as we move into the colder months again and the fish are not feeding quite as hard, then it's all about the bright ones again that will get you a quick bite, you know. But having said that, I think with the bottom bait rigs, I tend to, just because by the very nature I'm feeding normally a lot more bait when I'm fishing over the bottom, I do like to put a little sighter on top of the bait. So a little bit of plastic corn or half a pop-up trimmed down, just something to catch their eye, you know, because when you've got a large bed of bait out there, again, it's about making sure that they can see that particular hook bait. You know, it's very easy with a couple of hundred baits out there and some hemp seed or pellets that they just don't get to your hook bait, you know, and you could have fish feeding on your area and never really know about it. So it's a bit of both really, but I guess I feel most confident when I've got a hook bait that completely matches my free offerings, and in an ideal scenario, the carp are going around picking up my hook baits just like they're another freebie really, you know. This particular water, obviously it's early spring. I've done very little work with a marker rod. I'm not that interested in finding really defined spots. I don't think you need to. You know, I think it's all about just getting on the fish and presenting baits that they can see first and foremost. I wouldn't expect them to be digging up the bottom at the moment. They'll be cruising around, just dropping down here, there and everywhere. So this is kind of the classic type of angling that I do, you know, where I'm fishing over a spread of boilies. Not loads at the moment because it's still very early in the year. And I'm fishing with hook baits that are charged up with liquids. They're quite visual. I've got 2 red ones on and a white one at the moment. And I'm happy just to cast around, you know, if I see fish showing in an area. I'm actually using Chod rigs at the moment, so I can be sure that wherever I land, the bait's going to be presented. And as the season progresses, and I think those spots become a little bit more defined, and that's a kind of natural progression that happens in every season, you know, particularly as the year pans out. and a bit more bait goes into the lake. But early spring, it's all about just getting on top of the fish and giving them a hook bait that they can't really miss, and a little bit of feed to maybe tip them into feeding in the first place, you know, particularly if they're just cruising around and they're not really that keyed into picking baits off the bottom yet. You know, there's a lot of natural food coming off the bottom when the sun first comes out. So this is generally how I tend to fish all through the spring, you know, moving around, staying mobile, staying on the carp, not being weighted down with a load of bait as well, and just generally making sure that I've got hook baits in the general area where the fish are, you know. I think, you know, this time of year, if you start casting around loads with a marker and that, the fish, you know, they're not used to the pressure at the moment. They'll just move out into another area of the lake where it's quieter. So the type of fishing that I'm doing at the moment is very reactive, but it's great fun when you're fishing like that. You know, you really feel like you're being proactive as well, rather than just sitting it out and waiting for them to turn up. So pop-ups, lightly spread a bait, and hopefully a big one round the corner.